We pay taxes all the time. For example, if you walk into a store and you make a purchase, you'll have sales tax on that. If you buy a home, you'll have property taxes, these real estate taxes. You have tax when you make income, right? You have a gain or loss in a sale of stock and investment. Even when you die, we have things called estate and inheritance taxes. So taxes are kind of a fact of life. And so you might be wondering, what do all these taxes go toward? You know, when I get my W-2 and I look at it and I see all the different taxes that are taken out here, what are those taxes actually being used for? Why is it that we're paying these taxes? And so the idea is this. The government, we have given the government, let me just change colors here. So we've got our government here. And this could be the state government, could be the federal government, could be the local government. We have given this government the power to tax its citizens, right? And so here are the citizens, that's us, and we've given the government the power, the legal right to tax us. And you might be wondering, well, why would we do something like that? Well, we're getting benefits in return. Right? So now we can sit here and argue about, you know, whether those benefits are justified in some cases or not. But for the most part, we're talking about some kind of benefit. So I'm going to talk about some examples to give you kind of some intuition. So if we think about roads, for example, so let's say that we have one town. Let's say that we have village A over here, and then we have village B over here. And we say, you know what? It would be really nice. Everybody in both villages would benefit, and everybody would be really happy if we had a road that connected these two villages. Then we could drive back and forth. People could visit each other. Business could be conducted. So why don't we go ahead and why don't we just build a road right here to connect these villages? Well, so how would you do it without the government? Well, you could ask a private citizen and say, look, why don't you pay for this road to be built here? You have something to gain. Well, sure, that person has something to gain, but everybody, or at least most people in these villages, are probably going to benefit from having this road, right? So there's a large number of people, but most of the people say, you know what, I don't want to pay, I don't want to chip in my fair share, I'll just let this other person do it. And that's actually, we call that a free rider problem in economics, but the main idea is that we can say, well, if we just rely on private citizens to come up with the money for this road, it might never happen because each person is saying, you know what, that'd be nice, but I'll wait for this other person to pay for it. So what we can do is we can give the power to this government, right? We have a government that has authority over this region, and we say, you know what, we've given you the power to tax, and so what you can do is basically forcibly extract monies from the people in Village A and Village B in order to kind of force them to contribute to pay for this road. So when you pay taxes to the government, right, so then this tax is going to the government, you're actually funding them to engage in projects such as building and maintaining roads. And you know, obviously roads aren't the other thing. We got to have a really long list. I mean, we think about schools, and by schools I'm talking about public schools, right? In public schools, you might even think this is a little bit different rationale in the sense that we kind of believe, at least in the United States, that education is kind of a fundamental right, right? So the children have the right, whether they grow up in poverty or what have you, they have the right to an education. And so then another thing that we give the government the right to tax is taxing us to make sure that we can actually pay for these public schools. And that's usually funded actually through property taxes. So sometimes it's a specific type of tax that the government levies on the citizens in order to fund a specific type of project. So, and if you're wondering too, I probably should have mentioned this power to tax, at least in the United States, it's actually present in the Constitution. It gives the government the right to tax citizens. And so there are other things too. I mean, we think about roads and schools, but obviously national defense is something that is more important for some countries than others, but that's something that is actually coming from our taxes. When we talk about the military budget and so forth, we're funding that. We're funding the military with the taxes we pay. When we have state parks, we have national parks, we have these different parks. So, you know, you might think, well, hey, I pay a fee when I go to this national park. Well, actually, it's very expensive to maintain these parks. And so our taxes fund that. And so it's just kind of something, again, where it's kind of the same idea as the roads. It's kind of like for the common good. Now, not everybody will go to a park, and so then some people might argue and say, I don't know that I want my tax dollars going toward a park that I don't use. So then we kind of get into some debate over where taxes are best allocated, but it's just important to know that things like parks are funded by our taxes. And then I don't think there are many people who would argue that police and fire protection, when we think about having a fire department, that's another thing where it kind of comes into the common good, right? Instead of just saying, well, hey, you know what, you could just pay for your own police protection or pay for your own fire protection. Well, that actually might lead to wealthy people having basically private armies and being able to put out fires and so forth. And then people who live in poverty, they don't have these benefits. And so what we've done is just said, you know what, we're going to fund these things through tax dollars and make sure everybody gets police and fire protection. At least in the United States, that's how it works. And so then we can also think that sometimes people have names for certain types of programs. You might have heard the phrase entitlement program. And there are certain programs like Social Security and Medicare, which are really kind of become hot-button political issues in determining how we fund these things and so forth. And we're going to have separate videos where we really get in depth and talk about what Medicare is and how it's funded and so forth. But suffice it to say that these are government programs that have been set up. So when we think about Medicare, we're thinking about medical insurance predominantly for people who are over age of 65, but there's also younger people who are disabled can get Medicare benefits as well. But Medicare is benefit actually through, when you see that FICA tax, there's actually a tax for Social Security and Medicare that'll come out of your wages, and so you're funding that as well. And so and this is just a very short list of all the different things. I mean, if we were to look at the budget, for example, for the U.S. government for the last year and all the projects it's funded and so forth, it would be ridiculously long, and we'd probably never even be able to wrap our heads around all the things that our taxes fund. An important thing to remember is that taxes aren't just collected by just we don't just have like one unit and just say, oh, all the taxes go into this pile here, this fund. We actually have multiple different governments that we're subject to taxation from. Right now, not all these governments are going to tax us in the same way, right? So we've got a federal government that taxes us, a state government that taxes us, local government that taxes us. Now, certain taxes, for example, the estate tax, otherwise known as the death tax, when you die, what you bequeath is being taxed. There's a federal tax on that. But you're probably not going to run into any kind of local tax, right? And by local, I'm talking about like, your city or county or something like that. So your county is probably not going to have any kind of estate tax or anything like that. Now, the federal government does. So in some cases, certain taxes, you're really only going to get hit by one government. Other taxes, like, for example, income tax could be, depending on where you live, you could be subject to federal tax, state tax, and local tax. But then some states, they might not have an income tax, and so in that case, maybe you just have to worry about federal income tax. So there's all these we've got these different branches of government. They're all collecting taxes, and those taxes that we've mentioned. Now, when you collect, let's say the government collects an income tax for you, that tax might go toward what we call like a general fund, right? So we call like that the general operating fund, or call that the operating fund, and we'll just think of that. Actually, we just say, okay, that money could be spent on anything. So we give it to the federal government. The federal government could say, oh, we'll spend X dollars on defense, we'll spend X dollars on roads, and so forth. But sometimes, when one of these governments here, when one of them has they solicit a tax, and some of the cases is for a specific project, right? So here we just say, well, it's the general operating fund, but also could be for a very specific project. For example, the local government decides to tax you to build that road, and they say this particular tax we're increasing specifically to make sure we can fund that road. Or like I said, with property taxes, funding public schools. I mean, they fund other things as well, but that's a very big part of the property taxes is funding the public school system. So it's just important to note that your taxes are supporting the activities. So we'll say the activities of your federal, state, and local government, depending on what type of tax we're talking about.